It would have been 284. Out of 650 seats in the House of Commons, Reform would have won 284 of them. The largest party in the country, short of a majority, but well clear of everyone else. Labour reduced from over 400 seats to 110, Conservatives down to 96. That's the projection that came out of yesterday's local elections, calculated by Michael Thrasher, an academic who's been doing this work for over 40 years and who told Sky News he'd never seen anything like it.
What I've never seen before is a party that comes from 0 to 40% in the vote. So there are lots of places, and of course we have to remember that in 2022 and 2021, where many of the comparisons that we've been making to come up with this NEV have to be based on what happened last time these particular local councils voted. Reform hardly stood, and where they did stand, very few people voted for them.
42% in 2 years. Never seen it. Most people watching haven't either. That's the story of yesterday, if you take it at face value. And I want to talk about why nobody should be taking it at face value. I also have a great clip of Zia Yusuf tying himself up in knots over Nigel Farage's dodgy 5 million, but we'll come to that. So, the actual results. Thursday's local elections covering councils across England, the Welsh Senedd and the Scottish Parliament produced what polling experts call a national equivalent vote share. In plain English, it's what the country would have looked like if everyone had voted the same way in a general election. The numbers were these. Reform were on 27%, the Conservatives on 20%, Labour on 15%, the Greens, the Lib Dems both on 14%. Labour lost over 1,200 councillors. Welsh Labour First Minister lost her seat in the Senedd and resigned as leader. Reform took council majorities in places where they barely had a candidate 2 years ago. It's a redrawing of the political map. That much isn't in dispute. What is in dispute, or what should be, is whether this should have happened the way it happened. Because questions voters might have wanted answered before they marked their ballots, they weren't being answered. They weren't even really being asked. And we know that because someone whose job it is to cover this stuff went and said it out loud. This is Dan Hodges. He writes for the Mail and the Mail on Sunday. He is not, and I want to stress this, some left-wing campaigner with a grudge against reform. Hodges is a centrist to right columnist who has been broadly sympathetic to populist politics of years. On the 6th of May, the day before the local elections, he tweeted this. When the elections are out of the way, he's going to have to answer questions about this. His story isn't stacking up. The he is Farage, and this is the £5 million gift Farage received from a Thailand-based crypto billionaire called Christopher Harborne in June of 2024, weeks before he announced that he was running for Clacton, a gift Farage didn't declare to Parliament. So, just read that again. A right-leaning commentator on the eve of the vote telling everyone that questions are coming after the polls close, not before. 2 days before Hodges sent that tweet, on the 5th of May, Newsnight Victoria Derbyshire spent a full 8 minutes laying out the timeline of the gift, the donor's record, breaking subsequent donations to reform, and the MP Code of Conduct actually says about declaring benefits received the year before taking office. I've got a whole video on that, which you can check on after this one. Now, we know that Farage ducked that interview. He also ducked the Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg the same week, claiming that he was campaigning in Clacton or he'd changed his mind. The strategy was basically just to run down the clock, refuse interviews and get polling day out before any of it struck. It worked, and the polls came and went. And then on Friday, the day after voting closed, Reform finally sent Zia Yusuf out to face Matt Chorley. And Chorley asked him the question nobody had managed to land before we got to the vote. Not, is the gift declared? The ground had been already worked over many times. The answer, the harder question, are there other multi-million-pound gifts that we don't know about? And watch him just completely fall to pieces.
Are there any other big multi-million-pound gifts we don't know about? Because we only know about this because of The Guardian. Are you aware there were any others?
Well, if they were, look, it would. I want to go back to the original point here because I think you're conflating lots of different issues. This was a unconditional personal gift to Nigel to pay for his security before he was even considering becoming an MP. I wasn't even in politics at the time, by the way. This was this was a long time ago.
Are there other multi-million-pound gifts to Nigel Farage in the 12 months before he became an MP that we don't know about?
I want to say it again. This was a personal, unconditional gift to Nigel as a private citizen before he was even considering. If you had asked me, if you were asking me questions with regards to the party, if you were asking me questions
that we don't know about,
if you were asking me about anything to do with business, Nigel's political business, if you were asking me about donations to the party, I think that would be very reasonable, and I would give you an answer to that. But again, I think you're conflating the implication of your question. No, because the premise of your question.
Multi-million-pound gifts given to Nigel Farage in the 12 months before the election that we don't know about.
The premise of your question is that I should have some insight into the personal matters of Nigel in his capacity as a private citizen before he even before he was even considering becoming an MP. And I think that's obviously entirely reasonable.
Or no, or yes. There were three options.
The premise of your question is that I would have some insight into Nigel's personal affairs prior to him even considering becoming an MP. And I think that is obviously and objectively an unreasonable premise.
You see, he tried desperately to pivot to a question that he wasn't asked. The question is not, is this gift declared? The question there is, are there more? And he won't touch it. He accuses Chorley of conflating things. He calls the premise of the question unreasonable. What he didn't do, what he should have done in 2 seconds, if it were true, was to say no. And then there's the other line that he leans on. I wasn't even in politics at the time. He uses the same line when he's talking about the Welsh reform leader Nathan Gill, who went to prison over Russian bribes. But this time, let's actually check that against the public record. In June of 2024, Zia Yusuf personally donated £200,000 to Reform UK Limited, the biggest single donation of their entire general election campaign. A month later, in July of 2024, he was made chairman of the party. The man telling Matt Chorley he wasn't in politics at the time was, in that exact period, Reform's biggest donor and about to become its boss. Now, while all this is playing out, something else was happening across town. Labour is melting down, and by the end of Friday, 30 Labour MPs were publicly calling for Keir Starmer to resign. Backbench MPs, former cabinet ministers, anyone with a Twitter account and a bruised ego. The party is, to Westminster's favourite verb, imploding, in public, very loudly, where everyone can see it. And even Nigel Farage had some great advice for those Labour MPs.
It's something I want you all to bear in mind. He said, we got to the top and we won and we succeeded because we had our disagreements in private and not in public. All right? So, please heed my advice on that. There are times when it's better to bite your tongue, go and sit behind a desk, close the door, argue it out. Argue it out as fiercely as you want to. But after 4.5 years of psychodrama with the last Conservative government, and with Labour about to start ripping themselves apart, that's the last thing the voting public want to see. All right, so please bear that in mind. Well, that may be a serious note to finish on, but as I said before, we are the fun party.
Yeah. There's the man telling his own lot to keep their arguments behind closed doors, mocking the Conservatives for 4.5 years of psychodrama, and predicting Labour was about to start ripping themselves apart, which, to be fair, he's called correctly. But here's what's actually being preached. If you strip away the patriotism and the Reform Party of Canada reference, discipline of silence. Don't let the row show, don't let the crack show, sit behind a desk, close the door and argue it out. Whatever you do, don't let the people deciding how to vote see what your party is actually like. That's the strategy operationally. Run the clock down on a £5 million question for weeks before the vote. That's the strategy. Send your Home Affairs spokesperson out to refuse to deny there are more gifts. That is the strategy. What he calls discipline at a celebration speech is just media operation. The function of it is making sure nobody looks too hard until it's too late to matter. So here's where I'd land it. Yesterday wasn't really a story about Reform winning. It was a story about how much the voters were allowed to know before they voted. Hodges said the quiet part out loud on the 6th of May, and Yusuf showed you exactly why on the 8th. And Farage admitted to his own party that's the strategy, was to keep doing exactly that. The polls have closed, the council have changed hands, and only now are the questions being asked. But we've got 3 years until election. Will it matter by then?